the DAO was right now it's in a moment of transition because we're undergoing a kind of governance transition period where we're evaluating a bunch of different proposals from the community with the goal of like, how do we make the governance something more permissionless and also more up to date with the possibilities of like technically what is available to DAOs today.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Bitfinex Talks. I'm your host, Ricardo Martinez. Today, I'm joined by Rachel Rose O'Leary, who was an early contributor to the Julian Assange DAO. And I'm very happy to welcome her onto the show because the story behind the Julian Assange DAO and how they were able to help fund the legal battle that ultimately ended up in freeing Julian Assange is extremely fascinating. Rachel, how are you? Thanks for coming on the show.
Good, thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me, and happy to get down to the almost untold story of the Assange DAO.
Yeah, I guess let's get started with how you guys got started. What was the primary motivation to form the DAO?
Sure. So I suppose I have a particular view on this, in that, AssangeDAO was one of those things, like many things that happen, where a number of people have the same idea at the same time. And the reason why several of us kind of came to the conclusion that we needed an Assange DAO was largely because of the success of the Free Ross DAO.
Okay.
So to go back a little bit in time, before the Assange DAO, there was a DAO to free Ross Ulbricht called the Free Ross DAO. And the Free Ross DAO was very similar to the Assange DAO in that, it had this this figure at the center of it that was key kind of cypherpunk freedom fighter inside of crypto. And also it was similar in that the Free Ross DAO had bid on an NFT that Ross had made, and then, raised money through the DAO for this NFT, and, essentially had generated this wealth to purchase the NFT, and then also had money left over, which could be used then to for other initiatives to free Ross. So that had happened around the time we started thinking about AssangeDAO. And I think it was the moment when there was an announcement made that Assange was likely to be extradited. And a few of us had already been in contact with Assange's brother, Gabriel, about he was planning to tokenize the film that he had made of Assange. And so we were in discussions with him, and kind of through conversation, this was around, I suppose it was December 2021.
Okay.
We were talking with Gabriel, the brother, and we were talking about how we could use NFTs and tokenization to help the Assange case. And then, when we saw the Free Ross DAO, the success of that, a few of us had the same idea, which was basically let's do a Free Ross DAO for Assange. And at the time, Gabriel had kind of hinted that there was a one-of-one NFT that Assange was going to be collaborating on with this major artist. He hadn't told us who the artist was yet. So we kind of thought originally, actually, for the Assange DAO, we were like, what if we were to do a cypherpunk art collection, which would feature all kinds of different artworks, including some stuff from cypherpunk history, and some stuff from lunar punk, which is a kind of a word that was flying around a lot at the time. But in the end, we settled on the most kind of powerful, high impact thing, which was let's get a DAO together to bid on a one-of-one NFT that's made in collaboration between Assange and Pac, this digital artist. So then, a few of us converged on this idea simultaneously. A few Twitter posts were put out we all kind of jumped into a Telegram group, which was made, and started kind of working together to make the DAO happen. And that kind of really kicked off in about January 2022.
Okay. And you guys, I guess, were wildly more successful than the Ross Ulbricht DAO, because as I understand it, you guys raised like over $50 million, and the Ross Ulbricht DAO, I think, raised around $8 or $10 million.
That's correct.
Okay. And then Pac, the digital artist, I'm ignorant to the art world. Like, is he like a fairly famous, well-known artist? Like, how are you guys able to sell an NFT for almost as much as Beeple did, for example?
Well, I think Pac, so I'm not, I wasn't familiar with Pac's work before the AssangeDAO. But I think Pac does have his own network, and is a kind of notable artist. From my perspective, though, the kind of critical difference is Assange as a figure is a much has a much bigger kind of global reach than someone like Ross Ulbricht, who Ross is, like a hero in his own right, but is fairly marginal figure in that he's mostly known inside of crypto, and specifically in a kind of subset of crypto, maybe more connected to the Bitcoin community, the early kind of OG community, who remembered the Silk Road and so on. Whereas Assange, and WikiLeaks was really a phenomena that touched
global.
Millions and millions of people globally in many different countries. So that's the amazing thing when we look at the DAO. It had over 10,000 participants who donated funds, and we have a huge community also in China. As well as there being a kind of a big presence among a lot of kind of like important crypto figures who were, like publicizing the DAO and sharing the DAO back when we did the raise. So I think that had played a big part in why the DAO kind of took off in a major way. Also, I think the critical thing was the timing. So we were right at the kind of cusp, like the kind of end point of this this moment in crypto, this crypto kind of meta narrative of DAOs as a kind of new form of ICO. So almost every crypto cycle, there's like a new meta that's created that's something like an ICO, but in a different form. So, before ICOs, there was stuff like blockchain forks, where people would create a new fork of Bitcoin and announce a new token, and people would get in. Then it was ICOs themselves. Later it was kind of DeFi, yield farming. But in that era, which was like 2022, the meta was really about like DAOs and DAO fundraising. And a part of that was also to do with Constitution DAO, where Constitution DAO, which is also a DAO that came before AssangeDAO and kind of informed AssangeDAO a bit, was, this effort to band together to bid on buying the US Constitution, which was being sold in an auction. And that had a token associated with it, which I think was called People, if I'm not wrong, but maybe someone can correct me if I'm wrong. But what happened there was the DAO bid for the Constitution and actually was outbid for interesting reasons, which we can go into. That also impacted AssangeDAO, but we can go into that later. But they were outbid and they lost the auction. And something happened then where I'm pretty sure the money which was supposed to go to buying the Constitution then came back into the DAO, and the token kind of took off. And so I think there was a combination, when it came to the AssangeDAO, there's a combination of people wanting to donate to Assange who believed in the cause, and others who are kind of speculating on justice. thinking that it was going to go the same way as the Constitution DAO, which pumped after they lost the auction.
Okay. With the Justice token, I guess, like, for people that aren't familiar with the DAO, like, give us the rundown of how it's set up and the role of the Justice token itself.
Sure. So the DAO was, right now it's in a moment of transition, because we're undergoing a kind of governance transition period where we're evaluating a bunch of different proposals from the community with the goal of, like, how do we make the governance something more permissionless and also more up to date with the possibilities of, like, technically what is available to DAOs today. When we made the DAO, though, so we're talking back in early 2022, we basically just used what was the most common kind of DAO primitives available on Ethereum at the time, which has since changed, which is also why we're undergoing this shift now at the moment. So the way that the DAO is currently structured is it's essentially a multi-sig of kind of trusted community members that are close to the Assange cause, and then a token, which is the Justice token, which gives voting rights over the DAO. And then we have a proposal system which uses an Ethereum protocol called Snapshot, which basically allows people to make proposals and then vote on those proposals using the Justice token. But as I mentioned, we're undergoing this kind of restructure because there are now techniques available that would enable us to do a more, like, fully decentralized token holder led governance. So the plan is, or the hope is, that we're going to migrate to one of these more decentralized governance structures. But of course, the community needs to be on board with that. So we're using the existing governance process to try and update the governance to something more decentralized at the moment.
Okay. And then, like, I guess, assuming that the migration goes successfully, like, are you guys going to take up another cause now that Julian Assange has been freed from his long and lengthy legal battle?
So I think that's the kind of critical question that's facing the DAO now, and it's a very exciting question, because of what happened after the purchase of the NFT, which was, essentially AssangeDAO received all this funding, and then there was a decision made to send all the money that was raised to the NFT to bid. We call it the max bid. So we basically bid the entire treasury on the NFT, which was a contentious decision at the time because, while we didn't, it's interesting because we had all these plans in place for what would happen in the worst case scenario. Like, what would we do if we didn't win the auction, or if we didn't raise enough, and all these kind of, like, contingency plans that were very elaborate. But what we didn't plan for was, what if we raised much more than we expected? What if we raised so much that it actually exceeded somehow the perceived value of the NFT? So this was the difficult situation that we found ourselves in after we raised over 50 million, where there was members of the community that felt this NFT is not worth the entire treasury. But then at the same time, we also had, basically, the way that we'd structured the governance was very much based on the Free Ross DAO governance structure, where, because the Free Ross DAO was using the name Ross, and it kind of had Ross Ulbricht as a person at the center of the DAO, they had it so the mother of Ross, Lynn, had a kind of a veto over what would happen on the DAO. And that's because basically there was a there's a kind of a legal reason, which is like when you're using the likelihood, the how to say, when you're using the personhood of someone, and especially if there's a kind of a legal risk that the DAO might, go rogue and cause damage to that person, then there's kind of like a negotiation that you have to do with the owners, so to speak, of that personhood. So in our case, it was the Assange family, and it was the Assange family's wishes that the money be sent to the NFT. So we went through with that, even though it was not necessarily the wishes of the full community. So basically, it created a lot of division, and it's been a pain point for the DAO. And it left the DAO in this situation where, because there was a kind of a split in how people, the community inside the DAO, kind of viewed the vision of the DAO, or what the plan for the DAO was, it created this kind of this loss of direction. So what I mean by that is there were two visions, at least two visions of what the AssangeDAO was for. The first was that the AssangeDAO was a fundraising vehicle to raise money via the NFT and give the money to Assange's legal defense.
Okay.
The second vision for the DAO was that the DAO itself would be directly involved in freeing Assange. So that kind of vision involved that the DAO itself would have a treasury that it could use with the governance structure to vote on and create proposals that would work towards freeing Assange. So it would itself be kind of an active participant in the Free Assange campaign. However, in what ended up happening was all the money was sent to Assange. The DAO didn't get to play a role directly in freeing Assange, aside from being the largest donor of all time to the Free Assange campaign. But it didn't get to, for example, have a
direct the funds,
direct the funds in any way, have a say in how the funds were spent, and instead the funds were spent very opaquely through a German nonprofit foundation called the WOW Holland, which, in fairness to the WOW Holland, they obviously did a great job, because they funded a lot of legal defense, which basically freed Assange, and it was like a huge success. But the AssangeDAO, there was part of that kind of unrealized potential where the AssangeDAO wanted a more direct role in freeing Assange. So it just kind of freed it as a consequence of its funding, but not directly. And so this brings us to now, which is like the DAO has become the first DAO in history to achieve like a really high stakes, tangible goal. It set out to free Assange by all means necessary. It raised an enormous treasury, and as a consequence of that, it did end up freeing Assange, although it didn't have the role that it necessarily wanted to play in that. So now, the question comes: what happens to the DAO now that Assange is free? And to answer that question, basically, we first want to solve the governance question, because there's many different visions of where the DAO can go. One kind of possible direction is that the DAO becomes a kind of a more generalized cypherpunk freedom DAO. Another one is that it becomes a DAO that's directed in some way by Assange himself. That it becomes a pioneer in kind of WikiLeaks 2.0 technologies, or funds kind of technologies related to WikiLeaks. So there's many different possible futures for the DAO, but in order before beginning with that new future, we basically need to give the community proper decentralized governance, so that we can make decisions in a way that's legitimate and kind of satisfies all the different parties.
I read like an article recently saying that of the funds that were raised, like 37 million or something were spent in his defense, and ultimately that leading to him being freed. With the remaining funds, are those going to be like coming back into the DAO at some point, or is Wow Holland going to use those for other freedom-based activities?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, the DAO's interest is that the money would come back into the DAO, because then it would really give a future to AssangeDAO in terms of, like whatever path that the DAO takes. I think the most perfect ideal outcome, personally, is that the funds would come back and Assange himself takes on a leadership role in the DAO and kind of directs how those funds will be spent. I think that's like the most exciting outcome. What seems to be happening is different. I don't think anything's been made public about this. So it's just kind of rumor and conjecture at the moment. But I think what seems to be happening is that and again, possibly this won't happen, but it's just what I've heard through the grapevine, is that the Wow Holland is planning to give the funds back to Pac, the artist, who will then give the funds back to some foundation that's controlled by Assange. So, as I said, maybe this is not what's happening. Maybe I'm misinformed. That's what I've been told. And it's, as a DAO member and, one of like 10,000 people who contributed to the DAO, it's not great in the sense that it shows a certain cynicism about DAOs and the potential of DAOs, which was already present early days in AssangeDAO with the decision to send the entire treasury to the Wow Holland Foundation, and that decision was basically made by the Assange family because they felt that keeping it in the DAO would be too risky. The DAO could be too easily kind of taken over by bad actors, confused by PSYOP campaigns, and basically by securing it in a nonprofit foundation, they would have more control over the governance, and they could ensure that it wouldn't get hijacked by state actors and other bad actors, which I'm critical of that, but I also understand why they chose that. It's because obviously Assange is like an extremely high profile case. The idea that state actors would try to disrupt his funds in some way is like a very real threat. So I understand why they chose that, but from the DAO's perspective, it was a missed opportunity because we had a transparent, like a way of democratically, a kind of cypherpunk tool to collectively free Assange, which was a very motivated, and is a very motivated kind of ideological group of people who had the common objective that they wanted to free Assange by all means necessary, and we felt that we as a community had kind of had gathered value based on that promise, but we weren't able to fulfill that promise, and so it feels like in a way history is repeating when instead of the money being sent back to the DAO, that seems to me like a real kind of fulfillment of the original principles of crypto and of the cypherpunk movement that Assange represents, but choosing to kind of overlook that and again favor a non-crypto traditional institution like a non-profit, seems to me like a strange mentality. But we'll see what happens. I'm hoping that some money will come back to the DAO to empower us to continue the fight in whatever way the DAO chooses to.
Okay. And then with the migration to a more decentralized structure, like you mentioned that there's proposals that are currently being reviewed by the governance process, the members that are Justice token holders. Like how soon do you expect that like proposal to be either be approved or denied and have some sort of resolution on the migration issue?
I hope so. So just to give a kind of a clearer overview of the stage that we're at. Right now, we published a proposal, which is a proposal to basically choose another governance, and it's an invitation for the community to come forward with various different types of governance proposals. So that's out there. My hope is that the community has already started to come up with different ideas. A few of us have been working on one, which is the one I mentioned about kind of moving toward a more decentralized form of governance. That proposal is basically ready. So it's just a question of listing that proposal and then like letting people, giving time for votes. I think we actually have in the governance in the existing governance structure, fixed time. I think it might be 3 weeks. I need to check. So I could say that, maybe in 1 month, we will have clarity on that. Our hope is that there'll be many different proposals that will be able to be voted on. But in about a month, let's say, we might know for sure the governance structure. And then once that's been implemented, we can start debating, what's next for AssangeDAO through another set of proposals.
Are there any proposals to take up defense of other like high profile figures that are also being persecuted? I mean, like the Telegram CEO, Pavel Durov is someone that comes to mind, or even Ross Ulbricht himself, who is still incarcerated.
Yeah, I think that right now we're not at the stage where we have proposals for the future, but I think they're really good ideas when we get there. Also, the Tornado Cash is another thing that has been mentioned, like in the AssangeDAO community. Yeah, exactly. The Samurai devs as well. So that could be, in keeping with the token name Justice. That could be like a really relevant, I think, future for the DAO.
I know Assange himself, like, had deteriorating health over his long battle. He had to live in an embassy for like almost a decade. I'm sure he's taking some time off, like now that he's been freed, to kind of just reconnect with his family and all that. But is he himself like excited about the prospect of maybe becoming part of the DAO and directing the DAO, as you mentioned earlier?
So as you said, like Assange is like he's taken some rest. There's been no direct contact between Assange and the DAO yet, although we're all hopeful that when he's kind of ready, he will come. And so what we're basically doing is trying to make the DAO, preparing the DAO for that eventuality, and by improving the governance, brainstorming on future directions and so forth. But what we did here was back when the initial kind of raise happened, that he was like very interested and very excited. And just recently, one of the other kind of prominent DAO members, who's Amir Taki, wrote a proposal addressed to Assange that was shared with him, which is about the kind of the future of WikiLeaks, and also the role of AssangeDAO in that future. So that kind of involved new kinds of anonymous technologies and like peer-to-peer anonymous decentralized WikiLeaks, and migrating AssangeDAO to a fully anonymous DAO structure using DarkFi, and these kind of big ideas. So hopefully Assange, will chime in soon when he feels ready and start working on those new prospects.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
I guess since you just brought it up, like let's do a little DarkFi plug. You're also
Definitely.
a developer on the DarkFi project. Just tell the people what DarkFi is.
Yeah, definitely. So DarkFi is a new L1 for anonymous applications. So it's a proof of work blockchain using RandomX that we combine with a ZK layer where we can deploy anonymous applications. We're very application driven. So instead of trying to provide a general toolkit that can be used to make any app, as well as doing that, we're also building those apps ourselves to kind of demonstrate the possibilities of anonymous tech. So we have currently working a fully anonymous chat app, which is the most anonymous chat in the world, that we base all of our communication on. We also have anonymous task management system, and we have working on the blockchain anonymous payments, anonymous swaps, and an anonymous DAO, which is our most kind of complex product. It's very much based off of our experience in AssangeDAO, because when the AssangeDAO happened, we realized that DAOs on Ethereum are extremely vulnerable. They're vulnerable because all of the people that donated to, for example, AssangeDAO, were basically doxxed on chain and could have been persecuted for that activity. So they put themselves at risk by donating to Assange. So we were acutely aware of that. But also, there's another kind of interesting way in which the transparency of the DAO kind of caused issues, which was when it came to the auction for the NFT. So essentially, we'd raised all this money, and then when we went to actually bid on the NFT, it wasn't really a organic auction market. It was more like the performance of an auction, in the sense that everyone knew we had this treasury of 55 million. So when we bid 5 million or 10 million, everyone was saying, at some point they're just going to bid 55 million. So we're like, why should we even bid against them? And it became this very weird inorganic market of bids. So we realized at that point that anonymity, it's necessary to protect users. It's like a safety feature, but it's also necessary for game theory. You need information asymmetry for markets to work. And especially for something like an auction to work, which depends on anonymity, privacy, and lack of fully transparent prices. So, or fully transparent treasuries, at least the bids must be anonymous. So that was a big kind of inspiration for us in building the DAO. And then just to wrap up on DarkFi, we are currently, in an early kind of test net, and basically finalizing and preparing for release, which hopefully will be soon. There you go.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for that explanation. It's super exciting to consider the possibility of something like WikiLeaks in an anonymous, censorship-resistant DAO. I feel like that would put WikiLeaks back like in its position of prominence and give it like trust with potential whistleblowers again. Rose, thank you so much for coming on the show. We're out of time, but do you have any last words that you want to say before we go?
No, I mean, thank you so much for having me on. I would just say that, AssangeDAO, it's easy to kind of overlook this when like the media has typically overlooked the role of the DAO in freeing Assange. But this was 10,000 people that gathered together around a single purpose, which was to free Assange by all means necessary. And there was this complication with the max bid and etc. But fundamentally, it was the first DAO in history to achieve such a high stakes and powerful goal. So I think the Assange DAO really sets the standard for like tangible, real life impact in cryptocurrency. And I'm excited, as you said, for what happens when groups of this kind of intensity and this political will connect with anonymous peer-to-peer technologies. So I really think this is the beginning of a much bigger story about the power of cypherpunk coordination. So that's something that I'm really looking forward to see.
Yeah, me too. I think like what the Assange DAO was able to accomplish was one of the most cypherpunk things ever, to be honest.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Well, thanks again.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me on.